She had no reason to stop. He wasn't her assigned patient. He wasn't asking for help. He was just an old man sitting alone by a window every single morning like he was waiting for something that was never going to come. But she stopped anyway, every day, for months. And then one Tuesday morning, he was gone. What she discovered next changed everything she thought she knew about why she became a nurse in the first place. Before we go further, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button so you never miss what we post next. Sarah had been a nurse at Maplewood Care Center in Ohio for 11 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered which patients took their coffee with 2 sugars and which ones needed the blinds tilted just right before they could sleep. Her colleagues admired her. Her patients trusted her. But if you asked Sarah herself what she was most proud of, she wouldn't mention her certifications or her years of service. She'd tell you about Walter. Walter Briggs was 79 years old when he first arrived at Maplewood. He came in mid-November just as the first frost was settling over the parking lot and the hallways smelled of cinnamon from the kitchen down the corridor. He had no family listed on his intake form, no emergency contact, just a name, an age, and a small brown suitcase that he carried himself, despite the orderly offering to take it. Sarah noticed him on his 3rd morning. She was making her rounds when she saw him sitting in the chair beside his window, still dressed in his clothes from the night before, staring out at the bare oak tree in the courtyard below. He wasn't crying, he wasn't confused, he was simply sitting there with the particular stillness of a man who had ran out of places to be in a hurry. She knocked on the open door and asked if he'd had breakfast. He said he wasn't hungry. She brought him toast and orange juice anyway, and set it on the small table beside him without making a fuss about it. He didn't thank her, but he ate every bite after she left. The next morning, she stopped again, and the morning after that. It was never a long visit, sometimes only 4 or 5 minutes. She'd ask how he slept, whether the room was warm enough, whether he needed anything from the supply closet down the hall. Walter was a man of few words. He answered in short sentences and rarely asked questions of his own, but he always turned from the window when she came in, and slowly, almost without either of them noticing, he began to expect her. By December, he was saving her a piece of whatever dessert came with dinner, leaving it wrapped in a napkin on the corner of his tray. By January, he had started telling her small things, that he used to drive trucks cross-country for 30 years, that he once saw a tornado touch down in a field in Kansas and stood frozen watching it like it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he'd ever seen, that he had a daughter somewhere in Arizona who he hadn't spoken to in a long time. He never explained why. Sarah never pushed. What she understood, without needing the details, was that Walter had lived a full and complicated life and arrived at the end of it feeling like most of it had slipped through his fingers. And what she offered him each morning wasn't pity, it wasn't professional obligation, it was simply the quiet message that he was still worth showing up for. The other nurses noticed. One of them asked Sarah one afternoon why she spent so much time with the old man in room 14 when her caseload was already heavy. Sarah thought about it for a moment and said she honestly didn't know. She just knew that walking past his door without stopping never felt like an option. Months passed. The oak tree in the courtyard filled back in with green. Walter started eating breakfast in the common room some mornings instead of alone in his chair. He still wasn't a talkative man, but there was something lighter in him, something that hadn't been there the previous November. Staff noticed it. Even Walter seemed to notice it, though he'd never say so out loud. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late April, Sarah arrived for his shift and went straight to room 14 the way she always did. The chair by the window was empty. The bed was made. The small brown suitcase was gone. Her stomach dropped. She found the charge nurse at the station and asked where Walter was. The charge nurse looked at her with an expression that was careful and soft and told her that Walter had been transferred overnight to a hospital across town. His heart. They weren't sure yet how serious it was. Sarah stood very still for a moment. Then she finished her shift, drove home, and sat at her kitchen table for a long time without turning on any lights. 3 days later, she received a call from the hospital. Walter was stable. He was asking if someone could bring him his book from the nightstand in room 14, and he was asking specifically for the nurse who brought him toast on his 3rd morning. Sarah drove over on her day off. She found him propped up against 2 pillows, looking smaller than usual but alert, his eyes moving to the door the moment she appeared in it. She set his book on the table beside him and pulled up a chair.
He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. He told her he had something to say and that she needed her to let him finish before she responded. She nodded. Walter told her that he had arrived in Maplewood last November, fully prepared to simply wait out whatever time he had left. He said those were the exact words he used in his own mind. Wait it out, because he'd convinced himself that the meaningful parts of his life were already behind him. He'd made too many mistakes, lost too many people, let too much time pass without saying the things that needed to be said. He arrived at that place feeling like a man whose story was already over. Then he paused and looked down at his hands. He said that a young woman brought him toast on his third morning, and that she came back the next day and the day after that, and that at some point he stopped feeling like a man waiting to disappear and started feeling like a man who still had mornings worth waking up for. He told her that 6 weeks after she started visiting him, he wrote a letter to his daughter in Arizona, the first contact in 11 years. He told her it was Sarah's fault, and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly when he said it. He slid a folded piece of paper across her blanket toward her. She opened it slowly. It was a printed email. His daughter had written back. 3 pages. She was coming to see him in May. Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth. Walter told her he wasn't a man who said things like this easily, but that she had given him back something he thought was gone for good. Not through anything dramatic, not through any grand gesture, just by showing up each morning like he was worth the 4 minutes it took. He said she probably had no idea what that meant to a person who had spent years feeling invisible. Sarah sat with him for 2 hours that afternoon. They talked about his trucking days, about the tornado in Kansas, about his daughter whose name was Claire, and who apparently had his same stubborn streak and his same tendency to go quiet when things got hard. By the time Sarah stood to leave, the room felt different than it had when she walked in. Warmer somehow, fuller. She drove home as the sun was going down over the highway, the sky streaked with orange and pink the way it only gets in spring. And she thought about all the doors she passed every day, all the people sitting in chairs by windows, all the quiet moments that didn't ask for much but meant everything to someone who needed them. She thought about how close she had come on busy days to skipping room 14th, to telling herself she'll stop by later, to letting the morning pass without knocking. And she was so glad she never did. Walter was discharged back to Maplewood the following week. His daughter Claire arrived on a Saturday in May, just as he said she would. Sarah saw them together in the courtyard for the first time, sitting side by side on a bench beneath the oak tree that had filled back in with green. They weren't saying much, but Walter was facing forward instead of staring at the ground, and Claire had her hand resting over his, and neither of them looked like people who had run out of time. They looked like people who had just found a little more of it. If this story moved you in any way, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every time you do, it helps us reach someone else who might need to hear a story like this today. And before you go, tell us in the comments, have you ever shown up for someone in a small way without realizing how much it meant to them? We'd love to hear your story, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for another person is simply refuse to walk past their door. Thank you for watching.